The Greyhound bus wheezed to a stop at the single gas station that served as Cedar Ridge's unofficial bus depot. Sarah Martinez clutched her worn duffel bag, her knuckles white against the faded canvas. Through the dusty window, she could see the vast Montana landscape stretching endlessly, rolling hills dotted with cattle, and in the distance, the imposing Rocky Mountains piercing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. 22 years old, and this was as far as her last $47 could take her. The bus driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, tapped her shoulder gently. When she looked up, he pointed to the door and mouthed slowly, "Last stop, miss." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She'd become an expert at reading lips over the years, a skill born of necessity when the world refused to learn her language. As she stepped off the bus, the crisp mountain air hit her face. It was different from the humid, suffocating heat of East Texas. Here she could breathe. Here maybe she could disappear. "You the girl looking for work?" Sarah spun around to see a woman in her 50s approaching, her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Sarah nodded, then pulled out her phone, typing quickly, "Yes. Are you Mrs. Henderson from the ranch?" The woman read the message and smiled warmly. "I'm Betty Henderson. My husband Tom and I run the general store here in town. Jake Thompson asked us to keep an eye out for you. He's the one who needs help at the Triple T Ranch." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. For 3 weeks, she'd been responding to job postings online, most of which disappeared the moment potential employers learned about her hearing loss. But Jake Thompson's ad had been different. Seeking cook for remote ranch. Must be hardworking and reliable. All backgrounds welcome. Betty gestured toward an old pickup truck. "Jake's up at the ranch, about 20 miles into the mountains. I'll drive you up there." As they wound through narrow mountain roads, Betty kept glancing at Sarah in the rearview mirror. Finally, she pulled over at a scenic overlook. "Honey," Betty said, turning to face her, "I don't know what brought you all the way out here from Texas, but I want you to know, Cedar Ridge takes care of its own. Whatever you're running from, you're safe here." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She typed on her phone, "My family, they said I was too much trouble. That no one would ever want someone like me." Betty's expression hardened. "Well, your family's a bunch of fools then. Jake Thompson is a good man, lost his wife Emma 3 years ago in a car accident. He's been running that ranch alone ever since, barely eating, barely living. Maybe you two can help each other heal." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the Triple T Ranch. The main house was a sprawling log cabin with a wraparound porch, nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the sound of a hammer echoed from somewhere behind the barn. A man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Jake Thompson was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something in his posture, a careful way of moving as if he was protecting himself from further hurt. He approached the truck, his gaze settling on Sarah with curiosity rather than the pity she'd grown accustomed to. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice deep and gentle. When she didn't respond immediately, he didn't repeat himself louder like most people did. Instead he waited. Sarah climbed out of the truck and extended her hand. Jake shook it, his calloused palm warm and steady. She pulled out her phone. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I'm a hard worker, I promise, " Jake read the message and nodded. "I figured you might prefer texting. That works fine for me." He gestured toward the house. "Let me show you around. The job includes room and board. You'll have the guest cabin behind the main house. It's small but private." As they walked, Jake pointed out the various buildings, the barn, the chicken coop, the equipment shed. His movements were economical, purposeful. This was a man who'd learned to live with solitude. "I usually eat whatever I can throw together," Jake said as they entered the main house's kitchen. "Haven't had a proper meal since." He trailed off, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The kitchen was spacious but clearly underused. Dust covered the spice rack, and the only items in the refrigerator were beer, leftover pizza, and expired milk. Sarah looked around, already envisioning how she could bring life back to this space. She typed, "When do I start?" Jake's lips curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "How about tomorrow morning? I'll show you to your cabin." The guest cabin was indeed small, just a bedroom, bathroom, and tiny sitting area, but it was clean and had a view of the mountains that took Sarah's breath away. More importantly, it was hers. That night, as Sarah unpacked her few belongings, she found the letter at the bottom of her bag. The one her mother had pressed into her hands before slamming the door. Sarah, you're 22 years old. It's time you learned that the world doesn't owe you anything. Your father and I have done our best, but we can't keep making excuses for you. Maybe if you tried harder to fit in, things would be different. Don't come back until you've figured out how to be normal. Sarah crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. Tomorrow she would start over. Tomorrow she would prove that she was more than her family's disappointment. Through her window she could see the main house, where a single light glowed in what she assumed was Jake's bedroom. Two broken people, she thought, living on the same piece of land under the vast Montana sky. Maybe Betty was right. Maybe they could help each other heal. 3 weeks into her employment at the Triple T Ranch, Sarah had established a routine that brought order to both her life and Jake's. She rose before dawn, started coffee, and prepared hearty breakfast that Jake actually ate instead of grabbing a stale donut on his way out the door. The transformation in the kitchen was remarkable. Sarah had organized the spices, stocked the pantry with real ingredients, and filled the refrigerator with fresh vegetables from the weekly trip to town. The house began to smell like cinnamon rolls and pot roast instead of dust and loneliness. Jake, for his part, had been respectful but distant. Their interactions were limited to polite nods, text messages about meal preferences, and the occasional thumbs up when he particularly enjoyed something she'd cooked. But Sarah noticed things. She noticed how Jake's shoulders relaxed when he came in from a hard day to find dinner waiting. She noticed how he'd started lingering in the kitchen, reading her text messages more carefully, sometimes typing longer responses than necessary. She also noticed the framed photo on the mantelpiece, a beautiful blonde woman with a radiant smile, her arms wrapped around a younger, happier version of Jake. Emma, the wife he'd lost. On a particularly cold Thursday morning, Sarah was preparing to head into town for supplies when she found Jake in the barn, struggling to calm a distressed mare. "Easy, Bella," Jake murmured, his voice strained. "I know it hurts, girl." Sarah approached slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. The mare's leg was caught in some loose wire, and she was panicking, making the situation worse. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward and placed her hands on the mare's neck. She couldn't hear the animal's distressed whinnying, but she could feel the rapid heartbeat, the trembling muscles. She began to stroke the mare's neck in slow, rhythmic motions, her touch conveying a peace that transcended sound. Jake watched in amazement as Bella gradually calmed under Sarah's touch. Working together, they freed the mare's leg and treated the minor cuts. "How did you do that?" Jake asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Sarah pulled out her phone. Animals don't judge. They respond to energy, not words. I've always been good with them. Jake studied her for a long moment. "You know, I've been thinking, would you be willing to teach me some sign language? Seems like it might be easier than always using our phones." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. In her 22 years, no one, not family, not friends, not romantic interests, had ever asked to learn her language. "You want to learn ASL?" She typed. "If you're willing to teach me," Jake said. "I figure if we're going to be working together, we should be able to communicate properly." That evening after dinner, Sarah found herself sitting across from Jake at the kitchen table, teaching him basic signs. She started with simple words: hello, thank you, good, bad. Jake's hands were large and calloused from years of ranch work, but he was surprisingly gentle as he mimicked her movements. When he successfully signed thank you, Sarah's face lit up with the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her. "Your turn to teach me something," Sarah typed. "Show me how to properly care for the horses." Over the following days, their relationship began to shift. Jake would practice his signs during meals, sometimes getting them hilariously wrong, which made Sarah laugh, a sound Jake found himself wanting to hear more often, even though he knew she couldn't hear it herself. Sarah, meanwhile, threw herself into learning about ranch life. She helped Jake with the horses, learned to identify sick cattle, and even tried her hand at mending fences. Her determination impressed him. She never asked for special accommodations or complained about the physical demands of the work. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Jake signed a question he'd been practicing. "Why did you come here?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she began to sign, her movements slow and deliberate. "My family, they were ashamed of me. They said I was broken. That no man would ever want a wife who couldn't hear." Jake's jaw tightened. "They were wrong," he signed back, his movements clumsy but sincere. "Were they?" Sarah signed. "I'm 22 and I've never even been kissed. Every guy I've ever liked has seen my hearing aids and decided I'm too much work." Jake was quiet for a moment, then signed, "Their loss." The simplicity of his response, the matter-of-fact way he dismissed the cruelty she'd endured, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. That night, Sarah called her sister Maria for the first time since leaving Texas. The video call was tense from the start. "Sarah, you need to come home," Maria said, her lips moving in the exaggerated way that meant she was upset. "Mama's been talking to the Hernandez family. Their son Miguel is willing to marry you despite, you know. But you need to come back soon before he changes his mind." Sarah's hands shook as she signed back, knowing Maria would understand. "I'm not coming back. I have a job here. I'm happy." Happy? Maria's expression was incredulous. "Sarah, you're living in the middle of nowhere with some stranger. This isn't real life. You can't run away from what you are forever." "I'm not running away from what I am. I'm running away from people who think what I am is something to be ashamed of." "Don't be ridiculous. Miguel is a good man. He has a steady job and he's willing to overlook your situation. You're not going to get a better offer." Sarah ended the call without responding. She sat in her small cabin looking out at the mountains and realized something profound. For the first time in her life she didn't feel like she needed to be fixed. The next morning, Jake found her in the kitchen earlier than usual, aggressively kneading bread dough. "Everything okay?" he signed, his movements more fluid now after weeks of practice. Sarah paused, flour dusting her hands. "My family wants me to come back. To marry someone who sees me as a charity case." Jake's expression darkened. "What do you want?" Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had learned her language, who treated her like a capable partner rather than a burden, who had never once made her feel like she was less than whole. "I want to stay here, she signed. "If you'll have me." Jake's response was immediate, "For as long as you want." But even as relief flooded through Sarah, she couldn't shake the feeling that her family wouldn't give up so easily. The Hernandez family had money and influence in their small Texas town. If they wanted her back, they would find a way. She just hoped that when they did, Jake's promise would be enough to protect the new life she was building in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. The black SUV looked completely out of place parked next to Jake's weathered pickup truck. Sarah spotted it from the kitchen window as she was preparing lunch, and her blood ran cold. She recognized the Texas license plates, the expensive chrome detailing, the way it sat like a predator waiting to strike. They had found her. Jake was out checking the north pasture and wouldn't be back for hours. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to text him, but before she could type a message, the front door opened without a knock. "There you are, Mija." Sarah's father, Roberto Martinez, stepped into the kitchen like he owned the place. Behind him came Miguel Hernandez, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His dark eyes swept over Sarah with a proprietary satisfaction that made her skin crawl. Roberto's lips moved in rapid Spanish, but Sarah had stopped reading his lips the moment she saw Miguel. She knew what this was about. Miguel stepped forward, his movements calculated and smooth. When he spoke, he exaggerated his lip movements in the condescending way that hearing people often did when they thought they were being helpful. "Sarah, you've caused quite a stir. Running away like a child. But I'm willing to forgive this episode. We can be married next month just like your parents arranged." Sarah backed against the kitchen counter, her heart pounding. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Get out of my house." Miguel laughed, a sound Sarah felt more than heard through the vibrations in the floor. "This isn't your house, Sarah. You're playing pretend out here, but it's time to come home and face reality." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are." Roberto's expression was stern, his lips moving in the sharp, angry way that meant he was losing patience. "You've embarrassed our family enough. Miguel is offering you a good life, a chance to be normal. You're going to take it." Sarah shook her head violently, signing no with such force that Miguel stepped back. "Stop that," Miguel said, his voice sharp. "You won't need that, hand-waving, once we're married. I'll hire someone to help you communicate properly." The casual dismissal of her language, her identity, hit Sarah like a physical blow. This was exactly what she'd run from. People who saw her deafness as something to be managed rather than accepted. "I said no. I'm staying here." Miguel's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Sarah, be reasonable. What kind of life is this? Cooking for some cowboy in the middle of nowhere? You're 22 years old. It's time to stop being selfish and think about your family's reputation." The lady said no. All three of them turned to see Jake standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands and his storm-gray eyes fixed on Miguel with unmistakable hostility. He must have seen the SUV and come back early. Miguel straightened, sizing up Jake with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to intimidating others. You must be the rancher. I'm Miguel Hernandez. I'm here to collect my fiancée. She's not your fiancée, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded a storm. And she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Roberto stepped forward, his chest puffed with indignation. This is family business. Sarah belongs with us. Jake's gaze shifted to Sarah, who was pressed against the counter like a cornered animal. When their eyes met, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch, a fierce protectiveness that she'd never seen directed at her before. Sarah, Jake said, his voice gentle despite the tension crackling in the room. Do you want to go with them? Sarah shook her head, her movements sharp and definitive. Jake nodded and turned back to Miguel and Roberto. There's your answer. Time for you to leave. Miguel's facade of politeness finally cracked. You don't understand the situation here, Cowboy. Sarah is damaged. She needs family to take care of her. She can't make decisions like this on her own. The words hung in the air like a slap. Sarah felt the familiar shame creeping up her throat, the voice in her head that whispered maybe they were right, maybe she was fooling herself thinking she could have a normal life. But then Jake stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. The only thing damaged here is your ability to see what an incredible woman she is. Sarah is the strongest, most capable person I've ever met. She doesn't need anyone to take care of her, she takes care of herself just fine. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever seen her as strong. Miguel's face flushed with anger. You think you know her? You think this little fantasy you two are playing is real? She's deaf, for God's sake. She'll never be normal. She'll never be able to give you children who aren't defective like her. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt the words hit her like physical blows, each one confirming her deepest fears about herself. But Jake's reaction was swift and decisive. In 3 quick strides he crossed the kitchen and got in Miguel's face. Get out, Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. Get out of my house, off my land, and away from Sarah. Now. You can't keep her here against her family's wishes, Roberto protested. I'm not keeping her anywhere. She's choosing to stay. There's a difference, though I don't expect men like you to understand that. Miguel straightened his expensive jacket, his composure returning. This isn't over. Sarah has obligations. Legal obligations. Her family has already accepted my proposal on her behalf. Then her family can marry you, Jake said flatly. Sarah's an adult. She makes her own choices. As Miguel and Roberto headed for the door, Miguel turned back one last time. You think you're saving her, but you're just delaying the inevitable. She'll never be happy living a lie. Eventually she'll realize she needs to come home where she belongs. After they left, the kitchen felt eerily quiet. Sarah stood frozen by the counter, tears streaming down her face. All the old doubts came flooding back. Maybe Miguel was right, maybe she was living a fantasy, maybe she was being selfish. Jake approached her slowly, his movements careful and gentle. When he reached her, he lifted his hands and signed, Are you okay? Sarah shook her head, then buried her face in her hands. When she looked up, her signs were shaky. What if they're right? What if I'm just fooling myself? Jake's response was immediate and fierce. They're not right. You're not broken. You're perfect exactly as you are. But what if? Jake gently took her hands, stopping her mid-sign. When she looked up at him, his gray eyes were intense, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Sarah, he said aloud, then switched to sign, you are the bravest person I know. You left everything familiar to start over. You learned to run a ranch. You brought life back to this house, back to me. Don't let their fear and ignorance make you doubt yourself. Sarah stared at him, seeing something in his expression that made her heart race. There was more than protectiveness there, more than friendship. Jake. She began to sign, but he shook his head. There's something I need to tell you, he signed. Something I should have said weeks ago. But before he could continue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You have 48 hours to come home voluntarily, or we'll be back with legal papers. Miguel's family has influence. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Papa. Sarah showed Jake the message, and she watched his jaw tighten with determination. They can't force you to go back, he signed. Can't they? Sarah's signs were small, defeated. I don't have money for lawyers. I don't have family support. What if they really can make me go back? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through something. When he looked at her again, his expression was resolute. "There is one way to make sure they can never force you into anything again," he signed slowly. "What?" Jake took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he formed the signs. "Marry me." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. She stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "What?" She signed again. "Marry me, Sarah. Not because you have to, not because someone arranged it, but because you want to. Because I." He paused, his hands faltering. "Because I love you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she was sure Jake could hear it. "You love me?" She signed, her movements small and uncertain. "I've loved you since the day you calmed Bella in the barn. Since you brought laughter back to this house. Since you showed me that broken people can heal each other." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "But what about Emma?" She sighed. "Your wife." Jake's expression grew soft and sad. "Emma will always be part of me. But she's gone and I'm still here. I spent 3 years just existing, but you made me want to live again." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. She wasn't trying to fill Emma's place, she was creating her own. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter from her sister Maria. Unlike the harsh words from their parents, this letter was different. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said before you left. About running away from people who think what you are is something to be ashamed of. I think maybe you were right. Mama and Papa are still angry, but I miss you. I miss my sister. Miguel married someone else last month. A girl from Corpus Christi whose family has more money than ours. I think you dodged a bullet there. I hope you're happy in Montana. I hope you found what you were looking for." Sarah showed the letter to Jake, who read it with interest. "Do you want to write back?" he signed. Sarah considered this. "Maybe someday. When I'm ready. No rush. Family should be the people who love you as you are, not the people who share your DNA." As winter settled over the ranch, Sarah and Jake fell into new rhythms. Sarah had expanded her role beyond cooking. She was now helping Jake with the business side of the ranch, her attention to detail and organizational skills proving invaluable. Jake had become fluent enough in ASL to have full conversations, and their evening talks on the porch had become the highlight of both their days. One snowy evening in December, as they sat by the fireplace, Jake pulled out a small wrapped box. "It's not Christmas yet," Sarah signed, confused. "It's not a Christmas present. It's a thank you for saving my life present." Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant, 2 hands forming the sign for love, in ASL. "Jake, it's beautiful," Sarah signed, tears in her eyes. As he fastened the necklace around her neck, Jake spoke and signed simultaneously, "I love you, Sarah Thompson. Not in spite of who you are, but because of who you are. Every single part of you." Sarah turned in his arms, her hands framing his face. "I love you too. Thank you for showing me that I was never broken. I was just waiting for someone who spoke my language." Outside, snow continued to fall on the Rocky Mountains, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds sat by the fire, planning a future filled with the kind of love that sees no limitations, only possibilities. Sarah had come to Montana running from rejection and shame. She'd found acceptance, purpose, and a love deeper than she'd ever imagined possible. Most importantly, she'd found herself, not the broken version her family had seen, but the strong, capable, whole woman she'd always been. And true to his promise, she was never alone again. In the distance, a coyote howled at the moon, its call echoing across the vast Montana landscape. But Sarah didn't need to hear it to know it was there. She could feel it in the vibrations through the floorboards, in the way Jake's body tensed slightly as he listened, in the way their dog's ears perked up by the fire. She had learned that there were many ways to experience the world, many ways to communicate, many ways to love. And in this small cabin in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, with snow falling outside and her husband's arms around her, Sarah Martinez Thompson had found them all. The girl everyone had rejected had become a woman everyone in Cedar Ridge respected and loved. The cowboy who had lost everything had found it again in the most unexpected place. And their story, their real story, was just beginning.